Well, the news is moving and it's moving fast. As you know, as our viewers know, there was a ceasefire that came into effect last night in Lebanon, and of course, this was after Iran had been pushing, making it a condition of ongoing talks with the Americans. And then I just saw, as I'm sure you did too, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi tweeted out that the Strait of Hormuz would now be open for the remainder of the ceasefire as a result of the pressure the U.S. placed on Israel to cease its bombing of Iran. And then, of course, just before we started recording, Trump himself tweeted in very Trumpian fashion that the Israelis are now prohibited from bombing Lebanon any longer. Enough is enough. So I wanted to get your reaction to this latest news.
Well, first of all, I have to stress, as I've said many times before, I'm not in Iran, in the government. I'm not a part of the decision-making process. Maybe every now and then someone may ask me an opinion or for my opinion, but I don't make decisions, and I'm not up to speed on a lot of what goes on. These are my interpretations. First of all, nothing that Trump says is of any value to me, because he will say one thing today and he'll say something tomorrow. I can easily envisage Trump telling Netanyahu to give the Lebanese hell. I can envisage him doing that tomorrow. I can envisage him saying that about Gaza. Remember all the horrible things that he's said about Gaza, that he said about Iran, and obliterating Iran, taking Iran back to the Stone Age, erasing a civilization. I mean, these are the rantings that even the madmen of history have rarely we've rarely seen it from such people in the past. So the important thing is what happens on the ground. For Iran, in order to open the Strait of Hormuz, to bring it back to normal, because it was never shut, but it was limited. It was limited to ships that belonged to countries that were not adversaries. So was the Emirates an adversary? Of course it was. It was hosting U.S. bases. It facilitated the assault on Iran. Is that true about Bahrain? Of course it was. Was that true about Qatar? Of course it was. So there were limitations to who could pass through the Strait of Hormuz. In this agreement that Netanyahu did his best to wreck, the ceasefire was comprehensive for the entire region. Gaza, Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon. But the stress was on Lebanon was named because of the ongoing genocidal assault. So in order for the ceasefire to for Iran to carry out its obligations, the Americans had to carry out their obligations. And since that didn't happen in Lebanon, Iran prevented the extra ships from passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Mm-hmm. So now, after last night, when under immense pressure, because every day that ships don't go through, we're heading closer and closer to a catastrophic situation for the global economy. The pressure was mounting, and then the Iranians also threatened to strike the Israeli regime. So the Americans put pressure. The night before, the Israeli regime was supposed to accept the ceasefire. It failed to do so. Then last night they accepted. So based on that, the Iranians agreed to allow shipping to expand during the remainder period of the ceasefire. This is basically where we are right now. But the Iranians, they're in control of the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping will go through, and the Israelis no longer will have the opportunity to slaughter children. For now.
Well, it's always a good day when the Israelis don't have the opportunity to slaughter children. That's for sure. And I know I don't.
Well, I'm sure they'll be doing it in Gaza, but in any case, for now, that's not the case in Lebanon.
I wanted to also ask you, there's obviously this ongoing debate. Maybe we don't call it a debate. Maybe let's just say the people who are very anti-Iran, both inside and outside of Lebanon, are insisting that this ceasefire was not the result of anything related to Iran, but was in fact the result of the Lebanese government joining the Israelis against Hezbollah. As you saw, the Israeli ambassador to DC met directly with the Lebanese ambassador to DC under the auspices of Marco Rubio, trying to get their ceasefire with zero leverage after saying that they both have a common interest in destroying Hezbollah. And the U.S. government is trying to use this very collaborationist Lebanese government to try to stoke a civil war in the country, to get the Lebanese to do for Israel what Israel couldn't do for Israel, which is to attack Hezbollah. All that's to say, what is your response to that narrative that this had nothing to do with Iran? These two fronts are not connected to each other, and this was a result of American diplomacy and of rational minds in Lebanon finally making the right decision to meet with Israel?
Right. Well, I don't think anyone believes that. I don't think they believe that. I don't think that even a child believes that. The fact is that the Americans agreed to that ceasefire, and Netanyahu violated it, and violated that important part of the ceasefire. And the Pakistanis stated very explicitly that Lebanon was a part of the ceasefire. So the Iranians refrained from opening the Strait of Hormuz to expanded trade, and the pressure keeps mounting. And remember, what we're seeing right now in the global economy is just the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. The situation is going to get very bad in the future if this is not very swiftly resolved. And even if it's resolved, there's still going to be serious problems. But then Netanyahu, the night before, refused to accept, and the cabinet refused. And now, last night, they accepted. It was clear that the Israeli regime did not want this. And it was clear that Iran today allowing the ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz was as a result of the ceasefire that Netanyahu did not want. So they said that they're going to move forward all the way and meet their objectives in southern Lebanon. They haven't. Of course, we could have renewed fighting tomorrow, or after the 10 days, there could be an assault. But Trump is trying to spin the narrative in a way to say, no, we did not give those concessions. And he'll say the same thing about the Strait of Hormuz. He'll say the same thing about negotiations with Iran. He's always winning. He's winning too much. He's winning everything. Iran's military is defeated. But Iran's military is defeated, but no ships are going through the Strait of Hormuz. So as I said earlier on, I don't take anything that Trump says about anything, not just Iran and not just our region, about any issue. I don't take it and any of it seriously. What is important is what happens. We had a ceasefire. It was violated. Iran refused to carry out its obligations. Ultimately, pressure was put on the Israeli regime. It was so tough that they resisted for one day, and then ultimately the next day they accepted. That does not sound like two ambassadors having tea together in Washington, and then the Israelis saying, "Oh, okay, we'll just stop shooting at Hezbollah and stop killing people and stop blowing up villages in southern Lebanon because we like your ambassador." Doesn't sound like that was what happened.
But on that note, I do want to say that, this, I'm sure you've seen the language of this ceasefire, and the language of it is quite one-sided, as is to be expected by any ceasefire written by the Americans that involves the Israelis. And what I mean by that is that, there is no demand for Israeli withdrawal, which is actually different than even in 2024, because Israel never abided by it But the ceasefire agreement in 2024 actually stipulated that Israel would withdraw, which they never did. So they were constantly in violation of that ceasefire. There's actually no call for any Israeli withdrawal here. And of course, there's this stipulation that Israel retains this kind of what they call freedom of action, meaning that they can like bomb anything they want to in Lebanon at any time if they feel some sort of planned or imminent threat against them from Hezbollah. And we know how loosely that interpretation is by the Israelis. Not that they should have a right to do that. It stipulates no self-defense for Lebanon whatsoever. And also, you know, because of the lack of withdrawal issue, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that I know this is a temporary 10-day pause, but this is just going to create the same powder keg the last ceasefire created, right? Because you can't have these one-sided ceasefires. They're unsustainable. Eventually, the side that has ceased their fire will need to respond. That's just how it works. And then we're just looking at another war. So I guess my question for you is, and I know you're not inside the government having conversations, but you have expertise in how the Iranians might deal with these kinds of things. Do you see the Iranians still including Lebanon or certain stipulations and conditions about Israel's behavior in Lebanon in the ongoing broader regional negotiations with the Americans to try to get a better arrangement?
Absolutely. Iran is not going to forsake Lebanon. And I think you know the sort of relationship that exists between and the bond that exists between Iran and its friends in Lebanon. That's just impossible. Remember, one thing that has changed in all this is that the United States failed to win the war. Now, that doesn't mean the war is over.
Mm-hmm.
Many in Iran are expecting the United States to carry out a major assault on the country in the coming days.
Right.
So, because they brought in more assets, they want to, it's quite possible, very possible, that they will launch a ground offensive, and they'll probably take islands and territory, and then they'll declare some sort of victory, but they won't win. And just as they didn't win during the last 40 days, they're not going to win in any war against Iran. So I'm not saying that there won't be war. But the Iranians, what has changed is, A, the Americans have not won this war. They've lost the war. They thought it would be over in 24 or 48 hours. Then they thought, or they said, that Iran will run out of missiles and drones, and that it's lost its air defenses, and then it's lost its air force, and it's lost its navy, none of which is true. Iran's key assets are all deep underground, whether it's air defenses, whether it's jets, whether it's its naval speedboats. They're all in tunnels alongside the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, or inside in the interior. That's how Iran continues to fire so many missiles. The factories are all underground. So they've lost the war, and Iran now controls the Strait of Hormuz. And that, Mr. Medvedev, a few days ago in a tweet, said that that's Iran's nuclear weapon. So that changes the equation in the region, and it gives Iran more leverage in future about how to deal with Americans and how to deal with their key ally, the genocidal regime in Tel Aviv. But, you know, we have to have patience. The Iranians, excuse me, the Iranians, obviously, and the Americans are adversaries, largely because of the Israeli regime. I mean, I've said this elsewhere. There's a very good book on the U.S.-Iranian relationship called Going to Tehran, written by Flint and Hilary Mann Leverett. And it deals with a lot of the myths about Iran. It's very much worth reading, and maybe you should invite them on your show one day. And but also they provide the book basically says that the United States has to resolve its problems with Iran. And when they wrote the book, instead of welcoming it, analysts in the United States and in Washington hammered them, from the Democrats and the Republicans. And instead they chose the Zionist course of action. And we are now where we are. So if they had listened to these two former White House officials, because both of them worked in the White House, and they're academics, then we wouldn't be where we are. But we are in a very adversarial relationship because of the Israeli regime. And so this is not going to, nothing is going to end overnight. Even the ceasefire, as I said, it's going to end in a few days. And then after that, what happens? Are we going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz again if the Americans? So right now, the Americans are saying that they will continue the siege on Iranian ports. Trump has said that too today. But from what I'm being told, Iranian ships are passing through. So nothing is necessarily what it seems to be. And that's why nothing that Trump says should be taken seriously. But also nothing happens overnight either. Right now, the very fact that Trump says Israel does not have the right to attack Lebanon anymore is a big thing, even though you shouldn't have any expectations. Again, he could tomorrow say, kill them all. Let's get rid of all the Lebanese once and for all. He may say that. But the point is that it's clear that the Israelis have to shift their position and the Americans have to shift their position because they're not in control. What they expected to happen 40 days ago did not happen. And in fact, the Strait of Hormuz, which was open to all, is now controlled by what they claim is the losing side in the war.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. And you've already kind of alluded to this, but I just wanted to maybe ask you to elaborate in terms of the talks with the US. You just said that you do think that people are prepared for the idea that there could be another war in a few days as this pause ends. And I know none of us have a crystal ball. But you talked a little bit about it. And the Americans have lost and they'll continue to lose. Does that mean that Iran is ready for a round two if the Americans choose to continue this war?
Oh, yes. The Iranians are working 24 hours a day to prepare themselves for phase two. And phase two will, of course, include airstrikes and a land invasion. And the land invasion will, of course, be limited because the United States doesn't have the forces to carry out an expanded war. And then Iran will probably allow them, with some resistance, to take areas. And then it will strike them with drones and missiles. And after all, remember, the Iranians have been preparing this war for decades. You know me, I've been saying that all this would happen for years. I've been saying it since before Corona, that if the United States attacks Iran, the assets in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. And that's what Iran did. So if the United States attacks again, Iran will continue to retaliate because those regimes are all a part of this war. So when Iranian assets are destroyed, that's retaliation. But also, those missiles and drones that have been, that are being fired by Iran, that have been fired by Iran nonstop, show that Iran has been preparing itself for decades. And Iran has been preparing itself for a land invasion for decades. So if they underestimated Iran's missile and drone and air defense and its capabilities to control the Strait of Hormuz, you can be sure that they're, underestimating Iran's ability to defeat the United States armed forces on the ground. And so, if there is a land invasion, obviously we'll see images coming out from Western media showing how fantastic things are going forward. And that's how this war started too. And that's how the 12-day war started. For a few days, they were saying how well the Israelis are doing. And in the war with Iran, they were destroying everything in Iran. And then it turns out that they destroyed many thousands of what do you call them? Decoys. Because Iran has been deploying tens of thousands of decoys across the country, very good decoys, a lot of them Chinese, that even give off heat. So the Americans are constantly bombing fake helicopters, bombing fake airplanes, bombing fake missile launchers, bombing fake anti-aircraft systems, and spending a lot of money doing so. And the Iranians losing almost nothing as a result. And then when the Iranians fire back, they fire a cheap drone and destroy a $1 billion radar system.
Right.
So, the point that I'm making is that the Iranians, they were prepared for this war. And that's why, to the world's surprise, not to my surprise, and not to the surprise of many others, but to the world's surprise, Iran forced the United States to seek a ceasefire. Remember, at the beginning, Trump said unconditional surrender. Then it gradually evolved 15-point plan. Iran said no, and then the Americans had to accept the Iranian 10-point plan as the framework for negotiations. Now, we knew that the Americans were not going to accept the Iranian 10-point plan overnight, even though it's a very reasonable plan. It's not. It doesn't have anything extraordinary in it. But the very fact that Iran forced the United States to change and evolve its position, I think was a key. It was key for the international community to see how far the United States had to shift its policy towards Iran. But again, it doesn't mean that we're at the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. No one knows. I don't think even Trump knows. But Iran is prepared. It is prepared for the land war. And if there is a land war, I'm sure America will be hearing how great the Americans are doing. And then after a couple of weeks, we'll start seeing that it's actually not going that well. And then, meanwhile, the global economy will be going down, into the abyss.
Yeah, just the U.S. dragging everyone to hell, really. I mean, prices are already gone up so much. We all see it in our grocery bills and our gas bills, no matter where we live. And imagine how much worse that can get. I wanted to ask you, because I know that you were in Islamabad during the negotiations. And during that time, there was this piece that was published in the Washington Post that advocated for the Americans and Israelis assassinating the Iranian delegation to show them who's boss, to scare them, to force the Iranians into a surrender position. And so I'm just curious, you were there. You saw that op-ed, I imagine, while you were there. What was your reaction when you saw that?
People in the delegation believed that the chances that our plane on the way back to Iran would be shot down by the Americans or the Israelis was very high. And to the immense credit of everyone, men and women who were on the plane, not a single person stayed behind. Not that I know of. Not a single person. All the people I'm almost 100% sure that everyone got on the plane. And even though we were waiting for something to hit the plane. And so actually we were joking about it because on the way there, people were joking about me because as you may have heard, they put a bounty on my head.
Yes.
And so everyone was saying, well, someone would say, I need to buy a house or an apartment. I need to do this. I have this debt or that debt. And so they were talking about what they'll do when they hand me over, how their lives would improve. And then on the way back, I was telling them, you're not getting anything because you're coming down with me. But but the fact is that it's extraordinary. And the flight didn't come to Tehran. As soon as it entered Iranian airspace, they swiftly went to a city near the border of Afghanistan and Turkmenistan, and then we came to Tehran by land. It's about 1,000 kilometers. I came by train. But the point is that the United States has reached a point where the Washington Post, the media, is encouraging the regime to carry out crimes against humanity or war crimes. They're competing with one another as to who can be more sinister.
I mean, I think when it comes to being sinister and malicious, nobody has the Americans and Israelis beat after the last, several years of genocide. But, I think there's something particularly, I guess you learn a lot when you actually live under the bombs. That it hits differently, as I'm sure that I know you visited Syria, you visited Iraq, you visited Lebanon. This time in Lebanon is like I've been here for one war before, but this one was just the most evil I've ever experienced and had to face. And I didn't even have to face the worst of it. People had to face way worse, as I'm sure everybody watched on their social media feeds. So,
Yeah, what they've been doing to Lebanon is exactly what they were doing to Gaza. The only difference is that in Gaza, the Western media pretended that they couldn't confirm anything because they weren't there. But in Lebanon, you know as well as I, they were all there. And so
yeah.
the reports that they were giving were like Hezbollah strongholds, Hezbollah targets. And I spoke to two of the journalists because they contacted me uh, for like a soundbite. And I said, in your reports, you write this. And he said, well, no, both of them in different ways, basically said that, no, that's not on my report. The editor does this and the editor does. And I said, makes no difference. Your
Yeah.
name is on it. You are complicit in genocide. You are a part of the genocide. You are a Netanyahu foot soldier. And that's the reality. The media, the Western media based in Beirut, they are all a part of the genocide. They are all foot soldiers of a genocide because they are trying, whether they themselves or their overlords and their bosses, they are basically trying to justify this the onslaught, and history will remember each and every one of them for who they really are.
Yeah, my I have a relative who we lost the day that they did the 160 bombs in 10 minutes and just terrorized the country. And she was at a pharmacy with other friends picking up medications to distribute to displaced people. And so to see and I know that they're lying when they do it in Gaza. I know that they're lying when they do it in Lebanon from before, but to have it be that close to me and then to see media headlines say Hezbollah targets, it just hits differently when it is that close to you. I before I let you go, because I know you're short on time, I just very quickly wanted to ask you one last thing. I want to ask you about the Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states. How do you think the relationship after this is all said and done between Iran and the Arab Gulf states will have changed?
Well, Iran will never again allow the Persian Gulf to be a foothold for aggression against Iran or Yemen or Iraq or Syria or Lebanon. That era is over. Iran did not control the Strait of Hormuz before this war. Iran did not start this war. Each phase of this war, the escalation was started by the Americans and the Israelis on each occasion. But the Iranians took charge of the Strait of Hormuz and they're going to keep it. And they will make sure that these regimes, these family dictatorships, can no longer threaten Iranian people or anyone else through their position as U.S. proxies, through their status as U.S. proxies. If they want to have excellent relations with the United States, that's fine. If they want to do trade and business with the United States, that's up to them. I wouldn't advise it. The United States is the key ally of the monsters in Tel Aviv. But the Persian Gulf will no longer be a military stronghold or empire. That era is over. And these regimes, if they want to have economic prosperity in future, they have to recognize that they cannot help others kill Iranians. They are complicit in the death of thousands of Iranians. And they began that complicity by murdering 168 little girls at the elementary school in Minab. They have blood on their hands. They cannot pretend that they are neutral when those bases and their airspace and areas outside the bases were used to kill Iranians. So hopefully, my hope is that these regimes will ultimately fall and people will come to power, people who are reasonable. And as the empire weakens, hopefully that will ultimately happen. But if these regimes maintain power, these family dictatorships, they're not going to be able to do, and it's to their own benefit not to be milked, as Trump always said. But these people are just proxies. They are, whether it's Qatar or the Emirates or Bahrain or Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, they don't have all that much agency. They dislike one another in many instances, but they're still a part of the American empire.
Yeah, and after the war, or after, I shouldn't say after the war, because it's still going, but after the ceasefire was announced, you had one of the first statements by one top American general on video, literally by name, thanking those countries for their help in prosecuting the American war on Iran. So there's no denying it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Germans having bases in France and then striking the UK from those bases, and France saying it's none of our business. No one is going to
Right.
accept that.
Yeah. Well, Professor Mohammad Marandi, I know you're short on time, so I'm going to let you go. I want to thank you for joining us again, and hopefully we can have you back on soon.
Thank you very much for having me.